Hi, I'm Jacqueline Rinksmeyer, Executive Director of the Greater Medina Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us today to watch our annual Candidates Forum. We do this event in partnership with Medina TV, and I'm here today with General Manager Jared Fry.
Thank you, Jacqueline. You will notice today, as Jacqueline and I do not have our mask on, and as I interview these candidates, I will not be wearing a mask, nor will the candidates. We are following all the Department of Health guidelines in regards to spatial distancing, and with being on air and doing a broadcast, masks are not required.
All candidates in local contested races were invited to participate in these interviews. This forum is designed to inform the voting public of their choices in the upcoming election.
The views and opinions stated by the candidates during the course of these interviews are not necessarily those of Medina TV and the Greater Medina Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for exercising your right to vote in the upcoming election. Enjoy the Candidates Forum.
Joining us in studio, well, actually via Skype right now, is Anthony Gonzalez, the incumbent for the Ohio 16th Congressional District. Anthony, I want to welcome you and thank you for taking time out to speak with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, we're lucky to have you. And why don't you start off for any of the residents or voters that may not have had a chance to meet you yet? Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am the incumbent, and I was born and raised in Northeast Ohio, live in Rocky River with my wife, Elizabeth, and our two young kids. We have a 2.5-year-old Alexander and a 6-month-old Caroline, who was born right as the pandemic kicked off. So it's been an interesting time for sure as a family. But it's been an honor to be a part of our community, certainly, and to be a member of Congress. I was honored to be selected last cycle by the voters, and I think primarily, when I talk to folks, what I hear most is that it's the focus on jobs and the economy. My family came here from Cuba. We escaped the Castro regime and started a small business, started a steel factory. My father did in 1983, and we've been working in the manufacturing sector in the community for my entire life, and so we understand the importance of a good paying job, a robust Northeast Ohio economy, and how to create that, and how to create better lives for our community. And now, of course, everything has transitioned to defeating the virus and getting our way of life back and rebuilding that economy. So it's been an interesting 2 years, but it truly has been the honor of a lifetime. And I'm just happy that I have an opportunity to spend a few minutes with you here today.
Great. We'll talk about jobs and the economy here in a moment, but first explain the role of a congressman a little bit for our voters.
Yeah, so I see this as basically two roles. There's a legislative role and there's a leadership role. So on the legislative side, Congress is as messy and frustrating and chaotic as the viewers would imagine it is. Having said that, I've passed more bills than any Republican member of Congress. This cycle, we've had 3 signed into law. We have another 11 that have been passed out of the House, but not yet signed into law. We're hoping to get those, obviously, before the year's over. That's one side of the House. The other side is leadership and constituent services. And so we take a lot of pride in that. One of my goals has been to restore people's faith in the federal government and to restore faith in Congress. A hard thing to do when you're looking at single-digit approval ratings for Congress, but I think the quickest way you can do that is by being responsive to your constituents and helping them no matter what it is that they need. And we've done that during the pandemic, certainly, but even prior. We've actually opened up unemployment cases for families in the 16th district. That's a state issue, but we're actually using our contacts in the ODJFS to do that on behalf of constituents. Get people's stimulus checks, PPP dollars, et cetera. So anything that we're able to do on the leadership side, we do, and obviously we take that just as seriously as the legislative piece, because people need legislators who are responsive to their needs, not just legislatively, but also in the community.
And that's great. You touched on a lot of great things there with that answer. We'll delve into some of those a little bit more. But first, what was probably the thing you're most proud of that you've accomplished in your last term?
It's a good question. I don't, I'm not one to look back and pat myself on the back, to be perfectly honest. But I'll say this: one bill that we put forward, it was the first bill that I place forward. It's our Battlefield Cross bill to honor our veterans. This came as a result of members of the community after our battlefield crosses were taken out of the national cemeteries, coming to me and saying, "Hey, we need the battlefield cross in our national cemetery. It's an important monument to our veterans, those who've lost their lives in service of our country. No greater sacrifice on behalf of our nation." And so we put that bill forward, bipartisan, and it was signed into law in December of last year. And I got to be there for the signing with the president. And it was just a really special moment because, like I said, the idea came directly from our community. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. The veterans community reached out to me and said, "Hey, this was a bill last Congress that Congressman Macy put forward. Here's why it's important to us. Here's why it's important to Ohio's 16th district, and we want you to fight for it." And we were able to get that passed into law. And like I said, it was a huge honor, and just so happy that we got it done for our veterans. But really, because it came directly from the community, I think it's so important.
Yeah. That's a great thing. And now, in terms of talking about coming from the constituents, there seems to be a disconnect right now with everything that's going on in the world today. How do you maintain that communication and that closeness with your constituents?
This is an old business principle that I had, which is to be customer obsessed. And if you're obsessed with your customer, then you can create products that they love, hopefully, and serve them in a great manner. And so we've taken that to the office, and instead of saying customer first, we're constituent first. And that means that I'm on the phone daily with constituents. I always tell my staff at least a couple times a week, give me the hardest calls. I want the folks who are really struggling. I want to hear what's really on people's minds, and let me hear from them. And from that, then I think what to work on. And so that's how we do it as an office, and I think that's the right way. It's the fastest way to get thrown into Congress is to lose touch with your community, and so we do everything that we can to make sure that we are tied deeply into the community, and we have the voice of the 16th district, so that when I'm in Washington, I'm representing them and doing it effectively.
Well, that's great. Now we talk about the constituents and how you work with them. How's the relationship now, I guess, between the legislative and executive branches, and how do you bridge some of the gaps that you face there now?
Yeah, so Washington's as partisan as it's ever been, that's for sure. And a couple things that I do. Number one, I came here to pass legislation. I didn't come here to be a TV personality or to throw bombs or anything like that. I came here to pass legislation on behalf of the 60. So from the beginning, I've focused on building relationships across the aisle. I've earned the respect of my colleagues. The only way you can pass as many bills as we have is by having trust and respect to your colleagues on both sides. So that was a big focus. And then, just structurally, the way I joined a caucus called the Problem Solvers Caucus. It's 25 Republicans, 25 Democrats, and we meet once a week. We just had a meeting this morning. It's behind closed doors, but it's a great place to just have open dialogue, see where you can find commonality and what you may be able to put forward. And it was actually that group that I was working with over the last 8 weeks really closely that put forward a compromise COVID legislation package in hopes to get the sides back to the table. Right now, Speaker Pelosi and the White House are in two totally different places with respect to the appropriate amount of stimulus that we need coming next. And so I, along with 5 other colleagues in that Problem Solvers Caucus, spent the last 8 to 10 weeks really trying to hammer out our own compromise, just to try to get the folks back to the table to show that Republicans and Democrats can actually work together. And we released that last week, and it definitely created some momentum. We'll see if it works, but it certainly created momentum. The White House has said they're eager to continue negotiations and want to use our bill as a framework. The Speaker has unfortunately kind of poo-pooed it a little bit, but I think her members are going to put pressure on her, so hopefully we'll see that get done.
Well, we appreciate your efforts on that, and we'll wait to see how that turns out. What if you kind of speak about the things and looking to pass bills? What would be 3 of the top things you would like to see done if reelected? Yeah, well, the first thing, we have to defeat the virus, and we may do that prior to the election, frankly. But to defeat the virus, I think there's really 2 ways you're going to have to do that. One is either effective vaccines or therapeutics, safe and effective, and this operation
Warp Speed. I wish more people knew about it. I sincerely believe that this will be the most impressive set of medical innovations in the history of the world, and we will look back on it in the same way we look at the Manhattan Project. Operation Warp Speed, I'd encourage you to look into it if you haven't. It's a great program, and the vaccine development is happening. So that's number one. Number two, to get rapid response testing. So kind of like I always call it the pregnancy test for COVID. So something that you can spit on or whatever, and it gives you a result in a few minutes and is cheap. We need those throughout all of Northeast Ohio and throughout the entire country. We get those two things in place, I think that we will largely move on from the virus, which we all would love. My goodness, love that. So that's number one. And then number two is to start rebuilding the economy. And I kind of have three pillars in there. One is to reshore jobs, get our medical supply chain back from China, get our defense supply chain back from China. We need those manufacturing jobs in our country. In particular, we need them in Northeast Ohio. So that's priority number one. Priority number two is to rebuild our infrastructure. We have some great ideas around that, borrowing some concepts from some of our G7 allies and how they fund infrastructure. And then third, we got to reinvest in our workforce. There's going to be a lot of people, once this is all said and done, that will have been out of the workforce for many months and are going to need to be reskilled and retooled so that we have the most robust recovery that we could possibly have. And so if we invest in our workforce, we invest in reshoring, we invest in our infrastructure, I think we'll grow back better than ever.
Now, in terms of the business side of things, you're exactly right. With COVID, you've had businesses, whether it's employees being laid off and unemployed, up to businesses having to close and close down, unable to maintain under these conditions. And then there's also businesses trying to start new in this new environment. How, or what would be your approach to assisting businesses in any of these conditions?
Yeah, again, I think it all comes down to defeating the virus. I mean, the bulk of the job losses today that are still out there are in what I call the live economy. So hospitality, restaurants, hotels, all those things that you have to physically go do, things that you can't do over Skype and a Zoom call. That's where the bulk of the job losses still are today. And those are only going to come back once the virus is either gone or people are comfortable enough, or states are comfortable enough to reopen their economies because we have that rapid response testing. So that, more than anything, when it comes to new business starts, bankruptcies, what have you, is going to get us back quickly. In addition, though, I do think we should have another round of PPP loans to our small businesses, businesses that have been really impacted hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, think of like a concert hall, for example. Their revenue didn't go down 50%, it went down 100%. I mean, you talk about businesses that literally went to zero. And so in those instances, once we get through the virus, I plan to go back to concerts. I'm sure most people do. And so, those are viable businesses. They've just been hit so hard by COVID that they need a little bit of help. And so that's how I think we provide a bridge. I got a bridge to March because I think March is that's in my head where I think we're all fully past this thing. I could be wrong by a couple months, but it's not going to be too much longer than that. So, so that's sort of how I think about it. Let's bridge to the end of COVID. And make sure that our economy is as stable as possible so that we can regrow.
Now, of course, COVID being one of the big things that have happened here in this past year, but another thing that's kind of come to the forefront is social injustice, whether you look at that from LGBTQ community aspect or even the racial injustice that we have going on today. What are some of your things you're looking to do to help improve both these situations?
Yeah, so a couple things. A lot of it comes down, in my opinion, to leadership. Look, I'm Hispanic. My family was born. My father was born in Cuba, and me personally, I haven't dealt with much, if any, racism in my life, though it exists and it happens from time to time, but it doesn't really weigh me down. But the reality is, when you look at outcomes. There are still plenty of communities that aren't performing as well as we'd like as a society, and so I think it's incumbent upon everybody to create a system where that's not the case and where everybody has a chance. And to me, you start with school choice. The best thing that I ever had in life that has allowed me to succeed and really move forward is a great education. And I was fortunate; my parents were able to put me in schools that of their choice, and I think that shouldn't be something reserved for the wealthy. I think that should be reserved for everyone. I think every single parent in our country should be able to send their children to the schools of their choice. And if we start there with education, an educational opportunity, and expanding the opportunities, I think we'll see much better outcomes. And then with respect to sort of race itself, I always say these are conversations that need to happen around the dinner table in our communities and things like that. That's where it's solved. It's not solved by a law. It's not solved by some politician. It's solved by people having conversations and sitting down with folks who maybe don't look like them or think like them and trying to find common understanding. And then the final thing I'll say, maybe I should have led with this, is there's a legitimate issue that I think everybody wants to work on. There is an illegitimate way to work on it, and that is through rioting and looting and pillaging and all these sorts of things that we've seen in so many of our cities. We've avoided it for the most part in Ohio, but we still have had our issues. And the truth is, you're not going to solve anything if you're burning the city down, and that's all that's going to do is create more animosity, more anger, and more division. And so if we're going to come together and really advance our society, I think we need to rely on people like Martin Luther King and the example that they set of nonviolence, and relying on the historical values of our country and the founding values of our country to remind us as a society that we need to live more truly in faith of those values. And if we do that, we'll have progress. But if we're fighting each other and we're burning things down and we're looting and we're completely ignoring the law, we won't solve anything.
So we covered the social injustice side of things, the COVID crisis, but one of the issues, and I know when you ran for your last term, was one of the issues that was discussed is the opioid crisis. Do you feel that is still an issue, and just these other issues have kind of taken precedent in the meantime, or what is your stance on that right now?
Unfortunately, COVID has made a lot of those issues worse. As a result of COVID and the lockdowns, we've seen increases in drug addiction, we've seen increases in depression, we've seen increases in child sexual abuse, we've seen increases in crime across the board, including violent crime. And so, all of these issues that have historically been a challenge for Northeast Ohio and our country, they've actually gotten worse. And you hope that it's a short-term situation. But one thing I always say, in particular with child sexual abuse, this is an issue that I've tackled pretty aggressively in Congress. In that instance, for some people, when you shut everything down and everyone's forced to be at home, there are some kids where home is a nightmare, and it's the saddest thing in the world. I can't imagine as a father of two kids, just the trauma that would exist in that. And so that's all the more reason why we have got to defeat this virus, put it in the rearview mirror, and get back to our way of life. Because the people who are the most vulnerable, those who are drug addicted, depressed, etc., this has been unbelievably difficult for them.
Well, I appreciate you taking your time to answer all these questions I've had for you today, and appreciate your honesty with all these. But I want to give you an opportunity, in case I missed a subject you'd like to cover or anything like that. I want to give you your moment to talk directly to the voters and let them know what you'd like to tell them. So with that, I'll turn the microphone over to you.
Well, thank you. And first thing I'd like to say to the voters is thank you. Thank you for trusting me with this incredible responsibility to represent you in Washington for these last 2 years. I hope you'll give me another opportunity to do so. My charge since I got into this position was to legislate on your behalf and to lead on behalf of the community on the legislation. Pass more bills than any freshman Republican in all of Congress. I'm proud of that. Those are bills to advance child health, to honor our veterans, to push back on China, and to rebuild our economy. And I'll continue to do that. And then on the leadership side, we have, as an office, have done everything we can to help the community navigate the coronavirus, to get this past us so that we can defeat the virus restore our way of life, and rebuild the economy. And that's what I'll be focused on in my second term. So thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. I can't wait for us to be able to do this in person and not over these Skype calls.
Exactly, and we do appreciate you joining us on Skype again. That's Anthony Gonzalez, the incumbent for the Ohio 16th Congressional District. We definitely appreciate your time today, and usually I would give a handshake and wish you the best of luck this November, but I guess just virtually via Skype, I'll just verbally say good luck this November, and we wish you the best, Anthony.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.